Good morning and welcome to the second day of our conference. The format for this panel is going to be slightly different from those of yesterday. As you can see, we have two panelists. They're going to speak for half an hour each, and the subject is artificial intelligence, and they are both philosophers of great distinction. And let me just say briefly something about the philosophical background, which explains perhaps why they're here. I myself am a philosopher manqué. I became interested in philosophy as an undergraduate at Christ Church, Oxford, at a time when John Searle was there. And there were two very powerful strands in philosophy at that time to which I was exposed. One was the then dominant school of Oxford philosophy, as it was called, which was deeply biased towards a very rigorous analysis of the meaning of critical terms in moral philosophy or the philosophy of mind. And the dominant figure was J.L. Austin. Wittgenstein was very influential. And in ethics, the area I was particularly interested in, the reigning monarch was somebody called R.M. Hare. So it was a concern with such things as the logical status of propositions making moral assertions. Did they have a truth value, or were they merely expressions of opinion, or even worse, were they simply the equivalents of grunts and groans? I found this sterile, and it was explained to me that we had to go through it, like being in a gymnasium, so we would warm up and then we could be unleashed on the great issues of the day, such as whether we should have dropped the Hiroshima bomb or not. But it very soon became clear to me that we were actually going to be captive in the gymnasium forever, unless we took steps to escape it, which I was determined to do. And once you began to look around for alternative tendencies in philosophy, they were there. One of them, which was deeply disapproved of by the Oxford School, was the whole school of what was rather contemptuously called continental philosophy, deeply influenced by Marx. And so Marxism, of which the most powerful and influential example was Hannah Arendt, perhaps, and there was Lévi-Strauss, there was Foucault, Raymond Aron, Pierre Bourdieu, and sometimes Jean-Paul Sartre. So this was a milieu which really propels you into some of the great issues of post-war European political economy. And then there was also a tendency in English language philosophy, which, although not really close to the continental school in spirit, nonetheless was also escaping the gymnasium. And I would refer to the work of Peter Singer on animal rights, the wonderful book by Jonathan Glover, Humanity, A Moral History of the 20th Century, when he considers great moral issues such as whether we should have dropped the bomb, whether we should have fought the Vietnam War. The work of Stuart Hampshire is an extraordinary introduction to a book of his called Innocence and Experience, when he describes how the experience of debriefing Kaltenbrunner, one of the most evil figures of the Third Reich, revolutionized his view about moral philosophy, that our first task was to deal with evil. Forget about G.E. Moore and the meaning of the word good or the utilitarians. The Schwerpunkt, the first task was evil and how we constrain it. And I would refer also to the work of Bernard Williams, whose insight, which seems to be rather profound, is that our moral views are not necessarily going to take a coherent form, that they are a kind of very contingent descent from our history, and we have to understand that contingency before we can then think about how to change them. So it's in that context of philosophers getting out of the gymnasium, as it were, that it seems to me that what our two philosophers today are doing is of enormous significance, because what they're doing is to come to terms with the whole phenomenon of artificial intelligence. And this isn't a question of looking retrospectively at something that has happened, such as the dropping of Hiroshima bomb or the Vietnam War. It's looking at something which is absolutely contemporary and, as our conference title suggests, critical to our future, technology and the human future. And the question of the status and character of this artificial intelligence is of critical importance. And I would refer to two quotes that Professor Floridi has used in one of his essays. They come from two of the iconic figures of the information age, Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates. And they're saying, essentially, watch out. You know, these robots equipped with AI could be trouble for us quite soon. You know, what should we do about it? And I think what Professor Searle has done is to raise some very skeptical questions about what the character and status of this artificial intelligence is. Is it really intelligence? Does it have the qualities of our intelligence? If it doesn't, what kind of intelligence is it? And I think, although the two professors have crossed swords in the pages of the New York Review of Books, I think on some issues they are closer than one might think. But certainly Professor Floridi has raised this issue, and he has also raised the question about if these systems do not have an intelligence close to ours, what kind of intelligence do they have? And should we think of inventing concepts of intelligence which accommodate what they are? So anyway, I've said enough. Professor Searle is going to speak first, and he's going to speak for 30 minutes. John,
Thanks. Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. This has been a terrific conference. And in fact, I actually learned a whole lot of things from listening to other people, and I don't find that easy to do, frankly. But anyway, I did it. Okay, now I'm going to talk about AI, and I have to say at the start, more nonsense is talked about AI, and that's saying something, than almost anything outside the political realm. I mean, nonsense in the political realm, that leads the whole country now, and I mean all countries that I know of. But in the so-called intellectual realm, I think AI is sort of the leading contender for nonsense. I'll give you some examples. When a program called Deep Blue beat a famous chess player, I was living in Paris at the time, and I got a call from the New York Times, and they asked me, "Is this a blow to human dignity?" And I said, I have a pocket calculator that can outperform any mathematician that ever lived in the history of the world. I said, a blow to human dignity? The idea is ridiculous. It gets worse. There's a guy now works for Google, Ray Kurzweil, and Ray thinks we all are going to have immortality by getting ourselves uploaded onto decent hardware. Instead of this wet and mushy stuff in our skull, we're going to be uploaded onto a really good hard disk. Now, nobody wants to spend their life as a desktop or even a laptop, so you got to have bodies, but as a famous movie once said, consider plastics. So we're going to have plastics with a decent hard drive. And, well, you'll discover in a very few minutes why I think this is a load of nonsense. And I'm just giving you two spectacular examples. There are lots of others. Okay, before I get into some of the substantive issues, I need to remind you of a couple of distinctions that are standardly neglected. They are crucial for our culture, but they are not properly understood. The first distinction is about objectivity and subjectivity, and this is a big deal in our culture, and we strive for objective knowledge. The problem is that the concepts are systematically ambiguous between an epistemic sense and an ontological sense. Epistemically, objectivity and subjectivity are about claims. Claims can be objective or subjective. So if I say Edvard Munch was a Norwegian, that I take it is, if it's true, is true as a matter of objective fact. If I say Munch was the greatest Norwegian painter that ever lived, well, that's a matter of subjective opinion. So this illustrates the distinction between the epistemic sense of objectivity and subjectivity. However, there is an ontological sense. Epistemic is a fancy word, means having to do with knowledge. Ontological is a fancy word, means having to do with existence. And there are different modes of existence. Some entities have a mode of existence that does not depend on being experienced by a subject. Mountains, molecules, and tectonic plates are ontologically objective. Pains and tickles and itches are ontologically subjective. I want everybody to get that distinction. It's not very hard, but it's standardly neglected with disastrous consequences. When I first got interested in consciousness, I thought these damn brain stabbers, the neurobiologists at UCSF, ought to figure out how the brain causes consciousness. So I went over and told those guys, what am I paying you to do? Get busy and solve the problem of consciousness. And a standard response I got was, on your own account, consciousness is subjective, but science is objective, so there cannot be a science of consciousness. Well, you all see that's a fallacy of ambiguity. Science is indeed epistemically objective, but that doesn't prevent us from having an account of phenomena that are ontologically subjective. This is going to be very important in what follows, and it relates to a second distinction. We need a distinction between those features of reality that are what they are regardless of what anybody thinks. Mountains, molecules, and tectonic plates are what they are. They are observer independent. They don't care about our attitudes. But there are lots of things whose existence as what they are depends on our attitudes. They are observer relative. Think of money and property and government and marriage. It's all what we think it all is what it is because we think that's what it is. I went yesterday to one of these mysterious machines, and it gave me some Norwegian notes. Now, it is epistemically objective that this stuff is money, but it's only money because of the attitude we take toward it. So you have a peculiar situation that an observer relative phenomenon nonetheless admits of claims that are epistemically objective. It's a plain fact that it's a 200 kroner note, even though it is ontologically subjective in its mode of existence. Now, if you understand what I've said so far, you're way ahead of the philosophy profession. I mean, you're off and running. You're off to a good start. Okay. Now, I want you to keep all that in mind. It's going to turn out, you might wonder, why do I introduce all this scholastic stuff? Well, it's going to turn out that computation is observer relative. So it's not natural science. There are no Turing machines in nature. Somebody's a Turing machine only relative to an interpretation. So there's no science of computation. It's a branch of engineering, as you might have guessed by its position in the academic structure. Okay, I haven't got there yet. I'm going to get to that, but right now we're going to go through some of the claims made for AI. Now I'm going to start with an easy mistake. It's easy to point out, and I pointed it out 35 years ago. I mean, before most of you were born, I pointed out this mistake. I made a distinction between what I call strong AI and weak AI. Strong AI says the appropriately programmed digital computer literally has a mind. As one guy debated said, "We are creating minds," he said, when he was sitting at his console typing stuff in Lisp or whatever was the programming language he was using. That's strong AI. Weak AI says the appropriately programmed digital computer is useful in studying the mind. The computer is a tool. Artificial intelligence is a tool for studying the mind. Strong AI says we aren't just studying minds, we are creating minds, because the appropriately programmed computer literally has a mind. Now, when I first read that, I thought, well, it takes about 5 minutes to refute that, and here goes. Anybody got a watch? Here's the refutation. If that were right, then take any cognitive capacity I don't have, design a computer program for simulating the exercise of that capacity, and then I carry out the steps in the program, would I thereby acquire the capacity? As it happens, I don't speak Chinese. So imagine you have a computer program that will enable me to answer questions in Chinese. I'm locked in a room
with boxes of Chinese symbols. I get in Chinese symbols as questions. I don't know they're questions. You can imagine, they give me free beer or something to motivate me. But there I am in the room. I get these boring symbols coming in. I look up in a book what I'm supposed to do. The book is called A Computer Program, and I give back symbols as answers. And unknown to me, those symbols I give back are correct answers to the questions posed to me by the symbols that they gave in to me. Has everybody got the picture? I mean, I'm there in the room with these boxes full of symbols, and I get free beer to motivate me. And I get questions as input. I have a rule book called a program, and I give back answers as output. And we suppose that the programmers get so good at designing the programs, and I get so good at shuffling Chinese symbols, that my answers pass the Turing test. I can fool people into thinking I know Chinese. All the same, and this is the bottom line, I don't understand a word of Chinese. And if I don't understand Chinese on the basis of carrying out the steps in the program for understanding Chinese, then neither does any other digital computer on that basis, because no computer has anything I don't have. This is the famous argument. It's called the Chinese room argument, and it refutes strong artificial intelligence. Now, I cannot tell you the amount of nonsense that was said in response to that, and I can't resist mentioning a couple of them. I debated a guy in public, and he was a famous AI programmer, and he said, "Yeah, but suppose we ask you in Chinese. Do you understand Chinese?" Well, that did not seem to me a very convincing argument, but let's try it out. I'm there in the Chinese room, and I get a symbol that looks like this. This was in a dialect of Chinese that some of you won't recognize. But the symbol means, do you understand Chinese? Okay? And I look up what I'm supposed to do, and it says, give them back a symbol that looks like that. This is in that same dialect of Chinese. This symbol means, do you understand Chinese? This symbol means, why do you ask me such dumb questions? Can't you see I passed the Turing test? Well, anyway, you get the point. It's just an obvious falsehood to say that implementing a computer program is constitutive of or sufficient for human cognition. Why not? Well, the answer is obvious. The program is defined purely formally or syntactically. That's the power of the program. It's a matter of symbol manipulation. But human cognition has something more than a syntax. It has a semantics. And what the argument rests on is that the syntax is not sufficient for the semantics. Let me say a little bit more about that. The notion same computer program, same implemented program, defines what is technically called an equivalence class. It's an equivalence class that is defined entirely syntactically. The physics of the implementation is irrelevant to the notion same computer program. The computer program is purely syntactical. So for those of you who like arguments to be spelled out, here is the argument. Human minds have semantic contents. I actually understand sentences in English, for example. But the program is purely syntactical, and the syntax by itself is not sufficient for the semantics. That's what the Chinese room argument points out. The syntax of the program isn't sufficient for understanding. Therefore, the program is not a mind. Minds have semantics. Programs are purely syntactical. The syntax of the program isn't sufficient for the semantics. Therefore, the program is not a mind. It's a very simple argument. I don't know why it takes so much trouble to get people to understand it, but anyway, that's where it is. And you can see the power of the argument if you imagine me getting questions in Chinese and giving answers, and me getting questions in English and giving answers. In English, we imagine they ask me, what's the longest river in the United States? And I say, it's the Mississippi River, unless you count the Missouri as part of the Mississippi, in which case it's the Mississippi-Missouri River. Okay, that's easy. Now they ask me in Chinese, they give me another one of these symbols, and this one means, what's the longest river in China? Now, I don't know what it means. It's just another bunch of squiggle marks to me, but I look up what I'm supposed to do, and I give them back an answer that unknown to me means it's the Yangtze River, but it's also called the Jiang in some dialects of Chinese. Okay, now there, my answers to the question in Chinese are as good as a native Chinese speaker because I'm following the program. My answers to the questions in English are as good as a native English speaker because I am a native English speaker. But there's a huge difference on the inside. Where the English is concerned, I understand the questions and I understand the answers. In the Chinese case, I understand neither questions nor answers. Why not? Because I'm just a computer. The computer has no understanding. It just shuffles symbols. That's its power. Okay, how am I doing for time, boss?
Good, good.
I'm all right. I mean, now we're going to get into the harder parts. So here it goes. I'm going to take my jacket off. It's kind of hot in here. Okay. Now, if you look at cognitive science, and it was really, all this stuff about the computer got going in the early days of cognitive science, and it was an exciting time because, this was, not roughly speaking, 1980, because we were breaking free of the behaviorist paradigm in psychology. Why was cognitive science founded anyhow? I mean, the psychologists had plenty of money and all research grants and even institutes, you know. By the way, the buzzword in those days was behavioral. The Stanford Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences. Well, then the buzzword got changed to computational and cognitive. It was not an advance. Now the new buzzword is neurobiological. I like that better for reasons I'll tell you in a couple of minutes. All right, so here we were, and a whole lot of work was done on what was called a computational model of the mind. And the idea was, and this occurred in any number of textbooks that all had more or less the same title. They were called Computation and Cognition, Cognition and Computation, the Mind and Computation, Computational Theory of the Mind. You know, there are only so many permutations you can do on this, and I suppose all those books are out of date by now. But they were wonderfully enthusiastic. And the idea was that we now have devices that can do what cognition does. They can, and here comes some magic words, they can process information, and they have actual cognitive states and cognitive processes. Now this is a more interesting mistake than strong AI. Strong AI takes a couple of minutes to refute, and I'm happy to go over it again in the discussion. But this is more interesting, and it raises some very deep points, and I will now give you just a very brief refutation of this conception. Here is the problem. If you look at the key terms in cognitive science, and by the key terms I mean expressions like perception, memory, inference, rationality, and even information and computation, they all are systematically ambiguous. They're ambiguous between a sense which is observer independent, in the sense in which I have information about, there's a song about that. Do you know the way to San Jose? Well, I know the way to San Jose. You go on to Highway 80 and turn left, okay. But now that information is not observer relative, that's intrinsic. That really is in me. You want to know how to get to San Jose, you're looking at a guy who knows how to get to San Jose, and that information is intrinsic. However, the same information is available on my GPS. I don't know how to work the damn thing in the car, but people assure me that it's all that information is there. And indeed, the information is there in a map. But notice, that is observer relative. The sense in which I have information is intrinsic or observer independent. The sense in which the map has information is observer relative and entirely, so to speak, in the eye of the beholder. The information in the map is relative to my capacity to interpret the marks on the paper. Intrinsically, there's just marks on paper. Now, what's the point of all that? The point is this. When we're talking about computers, the actual kind of machine you buy in a store, in the intrinsic or observer-independent sense, it has no information at all. The information is like the information in a book or the information in a library. It's relative to our interpretation. The information is all observer relative, and so on with the other cognitive capacities. I now say correctly that my existing computer has a much better memory than early computers, but that doesn't mean it's going through the Proustian experience of calling up its early life as a box in a Chinese factory. No, it's nothing of the sort. The information in the memory in the computer, like the information, is all observer relative. The amount of information or intelligence in your computer, if we're talking about intrinsic information now, observer-independent information, it's zero. There is zero information, zero intelligence, zero cognitive processing. All of that is in the eye of the beholder. It's observer relative. Now you might say, what difference does it make? Who cares? If you've got a program that can drive a car or fly an airplane, who cares if the program actually has information in an observer relative or an observer independent sense? I think that's right. It doesn't matter a damn for most practical purposes. If they've got a program that can drive a car, then I don't care if the information is observer relative or is intrinsic. The mistake comes if they think it's psychologically relevant, and that's what they think. When Ray says we're all going to be uploaded onto decent hardware, he doesn't mean in some observer relative sense we're going to have minds. He thinks our minds are literally going to be there, whereas what's going to be there is in fact a computer disk with a whole lot of magnetic traces that can be interpreted by as an interpreter as representing information. But the information on the disk, like the information in the computer, is entirely observer relative. In the intrinsic sense, there's absolutely no information, no intelligence, no cognition, no cognitive processing in the computer. Why not? It passes the Turing test. And the answer is it doesn't have any consciousness. It's simply a set of electronic circuits that go through certain steps that we can interpret as information, but the information is entirely in the eye of the beholder. And so information has two senses, an observer-independent sense in which you and I have the information, for example, that we're today in Oslo, and the observer-relative sense in which the information in the computer is information only relative to somebody's capacity to interpret it as information. So there's a much deeper mistake than the mistake exposed by the Chinese room argument, and I want to make sure everybody understands this. The Chinese room argument points out that the syntax of the computer program does not intrinsically contain a semantics. The semantics of human cognition is not intrinsic to syntax. Everybody's got that, right? This is a deeper argument. This argument says the syntax is not intrinsic to physics. The computer program is not intrinsic to physics. It exists relative to an interpretation. But now notice, the fact that it's relative to an interpretation means that it has an element of ontological subjectivity. But we can nonetheless make epistemically objective claims. We can say the machine is running the Microsoft Word program, let's say. That's epistemically objective, even though the existence of the program itself is observer relative and therefore has an element of ontological subjectivity. The ontological subjectivity of the computational phenomena do not prevent us from making epistemically objective claims about those phenomena. The mistake is to think that we've made a natural science discovery when we make these observer relative attributions. So let me emphasize this point. There are no Turing machines in nature. Something is a Turing machine only relative to an interpretation. Look, I'll give you an example. You want to see a computer in action? This just computed a function. It's one of my favorite functions, s equals 1/2 gt squared, okay? And this just computed. I'll have it compute the same function again. But of course, and we could use that as a computer. If we had accurate stopwatches, we could figure out how far it fell just knowing by the formula and knowing the amount of time that it fell. But if this is a computer, then anything is a computer, and that's right. Computation is observer relative. In the old Chinese room days, when I used to debate these guys, I would often take some object at random, slam it on the table, and say, that is a digital computer. It just has a boring program. The program says, stay there. Of course, on the definition, it is a very simple Turing machine. It's rather boring by the standards of Turing machines, but what this illustrates is Turing machines are not part of nature. There are no Turing machines in nature. Something is a Turing machine only relative to an interpretation. How am I doing, boss?
Good.
Well, I mean, how much, I wasn't asking you to shut me up. I want to know how much time I have. I know I'm doing fine. I mean, that's their opinion. But how much time do I have?
10 minutes.
How much?
10.
10 minutes. Oh, God. Well, we got all day. Here I was trying to talk fast. Okay. Yeah, okay. Let me summarize some of these points and bring this discussion to a close, because the part that's most fun is the discussion part. What I have been saying is that if you take seriously the definition of computation provided to us by Alan Turing, and by the way, I think it's a tremendous intellectual achievement that Turing has left us with. The only mistake was the behaviorism of the Turing test. But the other notions of Turing's theorem and the Church-Turing thesis, all of those seem to me wonderful ideas, and they're part and parcel of our lives. Our lives now are very much influenced by the power of the digital computer. The mistake is to suppose that its enormous computational power gives it some psychological relevance. And the message that I've been trying to get across is the intelligence in intelligent machinery is absolutely zero. There's no intelligence whatever in any of these things. Can I see here's a wonderful device, cost me a lot of money, but it has zero intelligence if we're talking intrinsically. It's all observer relative, it's all in the eye of the beholder. And we can illustrate that by going through a series of questions. Question 1, could a machine think? Now, notice the presuppositions of the question that somehow machines are different from us. But of course, we are machines. If a machine is a physical system capable of performing functions, then we are machines, and our brains are sub-machines within the machine. So of course, machines can think. I have one in my skull, you have one in your skull. Okay, so that wasn't the question that bothered us. Well, here's a second question. How about an artifact, a human-made machine? Could that think? Well, we don't know how the brain does it, so we don't know how to do it artificially, but I see no obstacle in principle. We ought to hear the question, can you build a thinking machine? In the way that we hear the question, can you build an artificial heart that pumps blood? We know how the heart does it, so we can build an artificial heart that pumps blood. Could we build an artificial machine that, so to speak, pumped consciousness, that created consciousness? We don't know how, but I don't see any theoretical obstacle. You might just do it. If you figured out how the brain does it, you duplicate the powers of the brain. Well, let's go to question number 3. Yes, all the same, maybe you could build an artificial brain, but could you do it out of some non-organic material? Could you have a thinking machine out of non-organic material? And that's a factual question. We just don't know the answer to that. We know that the artificial heart does not require organic material. It's just a pump. But what is it about the brain that enables it to produce consciousness? Does it require some specific biochemistry, or does it just have to do with variable rates of neuron firings? That's a factual question. We don't know the answer. But there's no obstacle in principle to building a conscious machine out of something other than organic materials. So far our questions are getting rather trivial, obvious answers, but now we get to more deeper questions. How about a computer? Could a computer think? Well, again, you have to be very careful about the definition of a computer. If a computer is anything that computes, then of course we're all computers. I'll give you a very simple computation, not even in Chinese. If I write 1 + 1 = 2, that's a simple computation of the addition function. So I'm a computer, and so are all of you. Indeed, I doubt if anything could think if it couldn't do some kind of computation. I don't want to talk about my dogs. They're wonderfully intelligent. Tarski, they're Bernese mountain dogs, and Tarski is my current burner, and he's very intelligent. But can he do this kind of computation? Well, I don't know, but he can compute the distance between him and a cat, and he's not fast enough to actually catch the cat, but in any case, so it looks like any one of us is a computer in the sense that we can actually compute some simple functions. But the question that we're really trying to get at is not those questions. Could a machine think? Could an artifact think? Could a machine think if it wasn't made out of organic materials? The question is this: is computation, as defined by Alan Turing, as the manipulation of binary symbols, usually thought of as zeros and ones, but anything would do, is computation by itself sufficient for thinking? And the answer to that question is no. It's absolutely no, for reasons I've been telling you. Namely, the computation is defined purely formally or syntactically, and thinking has to have a content. But now it gets worse. Is computation, as so defined by Alan Turing, is that a part of nature? And the answer to that question is, apart from conscious minds actually going through steps by this, all computation is observer relative. It exists in the eye of the beholder. Okay, so I've tried to expose some of the worst forms of nonsense in artificial intelligence. There are other kinds. I mean, Ray is one of my favorites because I had to review a book by him. But in any case, maybe some others will come up. But the thing I want you to remember is this. When I was a kid, there were a lot of books with titles like The Age of Reason, The Age of Enlightenment, The Age of Faith. None of you are old enough to remember this, but there was a kind of optimism about our ability to absorb the history of philosophy in paperback books. And there was the age of this and the age of that. And I thought, well, what's our age? Our age, alas, is the age of bullshit. And what I've been trying to do is expose some of it. Thank you very much.
From here or there, whichever you like. Yeah, I'll introduce you. Yeah, I didn't really actually properly introduce John, who is the Slusser Professor Emeritus of Philosophy of Mind and Language at the University of California, Berkeley.
He just demoted me. I got promoted from being an associate professor.
I didn't. I said Slusser Professor.
Oh, Slusser. Okay, that's okay.
And a winner of the U.S. National Humanities Medal. And Luciano is Director of Research at the Oxford Internet Institute and Professor of Philosophy and Ethics of Information at Oxford. So, Luciano.
Let's see if we can. How do we fire out the So we need a way of showing the PowerPoint, but we're almost there. There you are. So as you can imagine, coming after John is not easy because how can you keep the audience alive after his presentation? So my task is going to be uphill. I have 30 minutes to try to show you how much John and I agree and how this can be read really as a chapter 2, basically, of what you just heard, chapter 1. So, initial point, there is no such thing as artificial intelligence. The Chinese room, as you heard, is a definite argument. I might be one of the few who actually thinks so, but there you go. Maybe that's why we are in the same room. I will show you why that is the case, in case some of you needed a little bit of extra convincing, but I think John has done already a fantastic job. And when I was an undergraduate student in Rome, and I read about the Chinese room, I thought, like, that's it. I mean, I better start getting into something else, because that is a deadline of research. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that you don't get a lot of money by doing it, as Kurzweil shows. But as we know, just to quote the technical term that has just been introduced by John, bullshit pays back a lot. So just because it pays back doesn't mean that it's anything else but bullshit. So my presentation will be divided into two halves. The first is, unfortunately, a gallery of horrors. And it's a long-ish, but I'll try to make it short, analysis of all the arguments that you find normally in newspapers, but sometimes even in journals, in favor of the existence of something like AI. What is today known as singularity. Again, thank you, Kurzweil, for introducing that. So the first half is to show you all the sort of arguments that you might have read somewhere and says, but surely there is something to it. There isn't. The second half is, and that is the distraction, is the challenges that we still have, precisely because these are merely syntactic engines. Precisely because you wish you were giving the keys of the world to an intelligent machine. You're not. You are still giving the key of the world to a machine. And that machine is stupid. Well, we have a problem then. Because if you were intelligent, well, I would be a little bit more relaxed. But it isn't. And since it isn't, then I have different kind of concerns. And those are the second half of my presentation. So, first of all, I don't have to read this aloud, but just to show you that the problem has been with us for a long time. This is Homer in the Iliad, and he's talking about robots. So it's not that we have been dreaming about someone doing the job for us only yesterday. I mean, we're lazy, we don't want to think, and we don't want to work. If you give £1 million or $1 million or €1 million or $1 million anything to anyone, the first thing that they do is to buy a car, go on holiday, get a new flat. It's not walking into a library, ever. Trust me. I probably, no, we are the only few exceptions here. No, but we're talking about the real people. So you win the lottery and you have a fantastic holiday. That is the purpose. That's what the Iliad reminds us. You are God, and the first thing you do is to create a robot that does the job for you because you're lazy. So we have had this problem for millennia, and we are kind of getting there. The will was the first step towards replacing the muscles, and the computer is the next step to replacing our brain. Remember, not intelligent. John is right. Still doing the job for us. So this is the reality today. Partnership of AI, as you heard, that is a number of companies, Amazon, Google, IBM, Facebook, and Microsoft coming together to talk about the ethics of AI. There's also something that you find normally, mistakes and errors make by AI. But above all, I want to remind you about this. Things like, oh, computers can't do X. Oh, can we stop doing that, please? That's so silly. Of course they can. It's just they do it completely differently. So computers cannot be, for example, imaginative, innovative. They cannot really. Look at this. This is a beautiful Rembrandt. In fact, it's a unique Rembrandt. It's a Rembrandt constructed, built from scratch by an AI computer. Because what they could do was to collect every data point about Rembrandt and ask the computer to check whatever patterns were more easily reproducible and whether that was going to be something like a portrait. Yes, it's a portrait of a man looking on their side with a hat, with that particular clothes. And from scratch, with a 3D printer, you build a new Rembrandt that doesn't exist. It's as good as you can possibly get. Is there art? Is there innovation? Those are old questions. We should stop asking those questions. We should ask the real questions which are with us today, something that I shall try to do in the second half. So remember, a point that I hope is in total agreement with what John just said. Computers can't do X, means assuming that they are anything like us. Wrong idea. Last time we tried was computers can't play chess, can't play Go, can't fly the airplane, can't park the car, can't buy a fridge on the web. Yes, it can, and better than anyone else. So as long as we stop comparing apples and oranges, we're safe. Now, this is science fiction, and it's very entertaining. Unfortunately, it's very close to where John lives. No, that's Hollywood. And we shouldn't believe Hollywood. This is what happens if you start talking about Hollywood too much, the big bad robot kind of thing. Now, I told you a gallery of arguments in favor of the idea that AI is real, is coming up, and will take over. That's called the singularity. The first argument is the if-then. It's beautiful. Even the brightest minds, normally they are in Cambridge, fall into this particular trap. If AI were to occur, when this happens, if it happens, we are totally screwed. Yes, that's completely true. And that's also true if the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were to appear. Totally screwed. It just is not going to happen. So the if-then, mind, it follows. It's just a premise that is not convincing. Say, well, but surely it could happen. So if the if-then sort of mechanism is there, what about could? Could. What kind of could are we talking about? And I know this is important. John has already broke ice, so I don't mind introducing a few distinctions here. But the first thing you do when you teach logic, as I did for 12 years, is to explain to both students that there are many could, are many ways of being possible. There's a could, which is, I could miss the flight this afternoon. Yeah, I could. And there's a could as in, I could receive £1 million from Nigeria, from an uncle I never heard of. Could, but I don't think so. The difference is between could as in likely, plausible, in the cards, versus it is not a contradiction to assume that such and such is going to happen. There's no contradiction in talking about AI. It's just not going to happen. Not with the science that we have, not with the technology we have. Oh, but there could be a breakthrough in the future where well, of course, but that's not an argument. It's a miracle. And you don't do science or miracles, or at least not in Oxford. I'll show you more later. But you are, of course, missing the evidence. The growth is exponential. Things are getting faster and faster, better and better. Of course, that's also true for turkeys. They're growing. And this was from The Economist. They're growing fast. In fact, they're growing so quickly that if we're not careful, they will outsize the whole planet. That's the rule. That's what you do normally if you talk to Kurzweil. Now, the exponential growth. Truth is, that's the real world. That's true in business, that's true in life. It's a sigmoid every time. Things grow, they reach a point, and then they stay around their particular point. You don't want to know what happens to turkeys because of their size. They can't reproduce, and yet we have turkeys. It's not difficult to imagine what you have to do to turkeys in order to have new turkeys when they cannot reproduce because their breast is too big. Disgusting. Next time you have Christmas. So things are exponentially not quite convincing. But what about sooner or later? Oh, that's a great argument. Oh, sooner or later is going to happen. Well, the sooner or later looks like this. For those of you too far away. Time, vague reference, hand waving. And on the other axis, intellectual level, power. Oh, beautiful. So now intellectual power, as in bits per second, becomes the mind, the intelligence. Total confusion, which we have already clarified, thanks to John before. And then human intellect. You wish. Now this is a matter of centuries. We've been growing. Human intellect, not a chance. It took millennia to get here. And certainly this red line is total fanciful, as we all know. This point here is when AI should surpass human intelligence, a dot on the map somewhere. So this is the kind of quote-unquote science that you get from the singularity people. Unconvincing, to say the least. But there's a moral argument. Well, even if all these things are not tenable, surely you want to be safe rather than sorry. Surely you want to invest millions of dollars now because you never know. Well, then surely, for the same reasoning, you should be wearing this when you cycle around Oslo. They might be reading your brain waves from Mars. And better safe than sorry. The better safe than sorry buys you anything. It's not an argument because it's actually opening all doors. So yes, safe than sorry, absolutely, if there is something to be safe about. Safe than sorry means you don't fly because, you never know, it could actually be an accident. Of course, that's way more likely than AI, and I still fly. So what is the rationale here to be safe and sorry? Again, hand waving. But this is the most beautiful one. I've heard this from graduate students in Oxford. Clearly, we made a mistake every now and then. Shouldn't be there. Professor Floridi, we've been wrong before. You're saying this now, but remember, in the past, we thought we couldn't fly, and look at us now. Well, that's a good argument. Past, can't fly, now you can fly. Present, no AI, AI. Right, past, you are mortal or immortal. Let me check. Past, can't fly. Now, can fly. Present, mortal. Future, nothing. Well, that's a total rubbish of an argument. With that argument, you can prove anything. By being wrong before, in the equation you put A and B, where you were being wrong before, and then you put C and D, or whatever kind. Now, remember, if an argument, and that's again, sorry for this sort of 101 for undergraduates, but if an argument buys you everything, is equivalent to white I win, black you lose. That's not a game you want to play. Is that clear? So anything like wrong before buys you absolutely anything, and therefore it's not a key, it's that kind of object that opens doors. Of course, you crash everything. Oh, there's a magic key. No, it isn't. It's a way of not respecting the lock. But we have an expert survey. You forget. But what about the experts? Now, remember that the experts have, shall we say, just a touch of a vested interest? Just a touch. So you ask to someone in AI whether AI is going to happen, and do we really want to guess what the answer is? This is like asking Manchester United fans whether they have a chance to win the championship. Like, they're fans, of course. What do you think? They're not insane. So the normal surveys, which are run among sort of the aficionados, they say, of course AI is going to happen. Well, unfortunately, then there are people at MIT who are quite serious about this, and they run the real sort of analysis. And instead of asking those who are already on board, in other words, instead of asking all Catholic priests in Rome, where I'm from, whether they believe in miracles or not, and guess what? 99% of priests believe in, yeah, thank you. Instead of doing that, they actually ask the real experts. I don't want to name people who are not here to defend themselves, but I do invite you to read the MIT review, which defines one of the people, whom I'm not going to mention because he's not here to defend himself, as the Trump of AI. Not the label I would like to go around with myself. Final argument. Not yet. I love this argument. It actually is friendly fire. It normally comes from people like me. You get a BBC journalist that says, no, Professor, we want to have a yes-no answer. Is AI possible or not? And you're a scientist. You're a serious person. It's like global warming. Are you 100%, no doubt whatsoever, that global warming is happening? And if you're a scientist, you're going to do things like almost certainly, not yet, 99%. And the journalist goes back and says, see, he's not quite sure. It's a 1%. No, all I'm doing is to say, this is logically possible, fine. A miracle could happen, I don't know. Is there anything in our technology today, in our science today, in our sort of computer science today, that promises even a vaguely, remotely resemblance of human intelligence in silicon? No, as in end of the story. But you can't exclude miracles. I can't, because I'm a serious guy, because I don't bullshit like other people. So, impossible? Never said that. I hope the picture is clear. So, we don't have a test to know whether this is happening or not, and I think this is as famous as the Chinese room introduced by John, the Turing test. And I'll go quickly, as I know you know. So, you lock in your room, you have two other agents in the other room, you don't know who is who, that's A and B. You ask questions for about 5 minutes, and you check the answers, and if 70%, which is pretty low, trust me, that's just a little bit above random. 70% of the times, you can't spot who is the computer and who is the human being, then the computer has passed the test. That was introduced by Alan Turing a long time ago. Actually, it was introduced in 1950 in a famous paper. And in 1950, Alan Turing, Cambridge, said it's going to be passed in 50 years. It hasn't, not even remotely. I know because I'm one of the judges in the competition. So he was wrong. He was wrong by far. We still have syntactic engines who do not understand questions. And therefore, as soon as you start asking a funny question, like, what can you do with a pair of shoes? So, what? You're not asking, what is the capital of France? And the human will tell you, that was the last time the test was in the UK, the computer will tell you, I'm not an encyclopedia. The human will tell you, I don't know, you can block a door, or you can nail something on the wall, you can walk on them. Is that hard to spot who is the computer and who's the human? So 50 years ago, he was wrong. But someone who should know better, Eric Schmidt, Google. Google has been buying AI companies by the bucket. And the largest group of AI researchers is now in London, and is DeepMind, and is not part of Google. He said that according to what he had heard, because he's a smart guy, he doesn't make prediction himself. He says, I heard that expert in AI said that the Turing test will be passed in about 5 years. Remember, Turing, 1950, prediction, 5 fingers, 50 years. Guess when he said, no, 5 years? 2013. Add another 5 fingers. And the prediction is by 2018, the Turing test will be passed. I have a bet with Eric in terms of aubergine. I hate aubergine, but I'm going to eat a full plate of it. I'll come back here. And in front of you, I'm going to have a massive amount of aubergine if by 2018 we have anything resembling passing the Turing test. So, well, we can be way more precise. Here is Kurzweil. And he said, no, sorry, everybody bought wrong. The Turing test will be passed. We will have full AI by 2028. Now, that is science. A precise date when a test is finally passed. Why 2028? You wonder. And then you discover that is when Kurzweil turns 80. It's his birthday. So by the time he's 80, that will have passed. This is the way we do science today. Well, it gets even more interesting because there are very smart people here. And Hawking said, well, no, everybody's wrong. Everybody. That's another Cambridge prediction, by the way. Is going to be passed in 2115. I leave you as an exercise to your intelligence. When he said that, don't tell me 5 plus 5, because there's 100 years, and he has 2 smart things about this. First, it's double the Turing, just in case. And second, no one will be there to prove him wrong. So I learned a lesson from there. Make a prediction, push it 100 years from now, because, catch me if you can, when I will be doing this. This was the last time the Turing test was run. The car could not fit in a parking space because it was too small. Duh. What was too small? Read, that's the level today of AI as we know it. Answer from one of the 2, guess whom? I'm not a walking encyclopedia, you know. No, what I know is that you are a syntactic engine of the kind just described by John. Namely, you have no clue, no understanding, no intelligence, no consciousness, no semantics, no meaning, no nothing but shuffling symbols. Very smart, but still that. So, that's the reality today. It's a bit too small for you, but if you go online, normally you ask to prove that you're not a robot. Things are completely the other way around. The other way around means that you had to pass this test, which is actually called a Turing test for humans. It is humans, because we now live in a world made of data, of these sort of gadgets, that are asked to prove that they are not machines. Now, that is why I want to introduce the second half of the talk. Because the first half is quite simple. You just show that, unfortunately, there's more bullshit out there. And someone has to go and up and say, which is a job for philosophers normally, say, sorry, let's not get distracted. We have some serious problems here. What are they? Well, luckily, you can still pass this. Say, good news. No, the robot. Thank you. I feel so reassured now. How do we got there? How do we get to the point of having all this bullshit flying around and being asked, the robot, on an ordinary everyday basis. There's no science fiction. This is weird. So here are 5 arrows in 5 seconds, so you get a quick overview. I know that most of you know already all this, so forgive me if it is a bit of a repetition, just to make sure that we're on the same page, and then we look at some of the challenges, the real ones. First of all, computational power. How much these things can process, how quickly, how powerful they are. Amazing. As John reminded us, the pocket calculator in your breast pocket is more powerful than 1,000 mathematicians. That's amazing. And it's growing. It's probably keep going for a little while if you find solutions. I can tell you more about this if you like. There are some physical limits to that too, but it's growing as we speak. Second, number of humans. You don't have to read the details, just look at the blue arrow. Number of humans online. Billions. Good old days when we were just a few, ARPANET, there was no web, there was nothing, and we were exchanging emails on a DOS. But those times are all way past. Today, Facebook has more than 1.5 billion people online on a regular basis, and that's just Facebook. So billions of humans doing what? Doing the job for the computers, to help computers to work better. So clearly that it has improved the sort of environment in which we all live, this infosphere. And also things are becoming not intelligent. We have a word which is smart. Again, I hope you understand what, I guess John and I are talking about. So things that can do a job properly. Now, it doesn't mean that they're intelligent, conscious, nothing. They're good at making a good coffee. They're good at cleaning the floor. They're good at parking their car. Fine. There are a lot of them. By 2015, we were producing 13 trillion transistors per second, which means that by the time I finish this phrase, there are another 13 trillion transistors in the universe. And another 13, another 13, another. It's mounting. Where do they go? Into everything we have around us. The computer I'm using right now, the thing that you have in your pocket, next thing you know, on the chair, you actually. So the Internet of Things is coming fast. And I just came back from South Korea yesterday, where one of the cutting edge conferences on smart cities, just show you what is actually happening now. There is no science fiction there. So we are transforming that environment too, which means that, again, for those of you a bit too distant, between 2003 and 2010, we passed the threshold where there were more humans talking to each other than machine-to-machine communication. By the time we are in 2020, and again, no Cambridge trick here is around the corner, okay? Cisco predicts that there will be about 7.6 billion people, which is not fairly accurate, and about 50 billion gadgets talking to each other, which simply means the printer to the computer, to your smartphone, to your fridge, to your car, etc. There will be about 7 things talking to each other per person. And that means everybody in the universe. Which means that from people like us in this room, multiply that by 3, 4, 5 times. Each of us will have tens of objects that are already interacting with each other. So when you go home and you see all those little blue or red lights in that modem going tru-du, you know that communication on Earth in terms of massive quantity of stuff being transferred from A to B, from B to A, is not a human business. It's a machine-to-machine phenomenon. That's, as it were, the sea on which we navigate. And it's a sea made of data, a lot of data. And I'm happy to talk about this data as mostly rubbish. That includes cats on Facebook. It includes the last song you recorded at a concert, the pictures you took from your last holiday. All that stuff in terms of billions of data points, what we call them zettabytes, it's mounting. Again, round the corner, actually, at Berkeley, the School of Information has calculated, second report, that we have created about 4.4 zettabytes, just think gazillion of stuff, from where we were scratching cows on the walls a long, long time ago, millennia, to 2013. Between 2013 and 2020, add a 0. There will be about 44. Now, even if we are wrong by far, it still means that most of the data we have been created by the living generation. We are generating all those data and all those computers. and all those transistors, and all those people online. So those are the 4 arrows going up constantly, and they keep growing. There's only one that is going down, and is cost. All this is getting cheaper by the day. So what has been happening here? Why these stupid machines are being so successful? After all, I mean, they do replace people when it comes to parking a car. And I think that's a good idea. I know a lot of people who can definitely do with that, certainly in Rome. So, well, the thing is that we haven't anything resembling intelligence. The computer in front of me is as intelligent as my grandmother's fridge. 0. So what's the difference? The difference is that we have transformed the world around the stupid machines. Now, in engineering, that is called an envelope. An envelope is the 3D space within which a robot arm like this acts successfully. So the last thing you do when you want to have a robot is to unleash a robot in the world and say, oh, paint the car, please. No, you build a whole architecture around that particular industrial robot so that the industrial robot is precise to the millisecond because the world has adapted to the machine, not vice versa. So this is what is happening to us. We're building amazing dishwashers. Look at that. It's a box around a very simple, stupid robot. It's the box that makes the robot successful, not vice versa. This is science fiction. It is, again, a robot that does the dishes like I do. But this is the future, and it's actually already happening. It's transforming the kitchen into an environment that is robot-friendly, AI-friendly. Because at the moment, I am this particular interface, and you probably are. Someone in the house is that interface. Dirty dishes into the enveloped robot. How do I envelope the whole kitchen? By having an arm that takes the dirty dishes into the smaller envelope represented by the dishwasher. It means that this was the past, when Wikipedia had this nice thing about adding Wikipedia at the bottom of the barcode, and this is the future. In fact, it's the present, not meant for our eyes. End of the story. We're not supposed to read it. So next time you scan a can of beans at the supermarket, remember, that is you helping the infosphere, the robot, to work, not vice versa. It's us adapting to this world that is more IT friendly rather than having intelligent machines doing the job for us. Remember the dream of the god. Now, in terms of ability to innovate, they can cook, and they cook very well, surely much better than a lot of my colleagues in Oxford. So what's the difference here? That this robot that can cook as well as a chef needs his own space. Look where the human is and where the robot is. Envelope. It's successful within that particular space because the space has been organized to make sure that it is successful. If the human were to walk in, it would be mince meat because the robot would not stop. Remember last time we had AI, DeepMind, etc., winning Go. If the fire alarm had been ringing, the robot would still be there calculating the next move. I hope all the humans would have pack and go because I said, oh, you know what, who cares? Fire, go. So that's the kind of enveloping that we are sort of quote-unquote enjoying. And that means that when grandmother was doing computer science, she was walking inside this big envelope, the space of computation. Programming was a screwdriver kind of activity, very somatic. Then her daughter walked out of the computer, and that's when we started talking about AI, not something that was independent, autonomous, out there. What's happening today is that we are walking back into it, and we don't even understand that we are inside unless it's not working. Unless then you go to a place and say, there's no internet, there's no connectivity. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So that is the kind of world that we are building, and within that world, we live on life, at least in some corners of the world, certainly here in Oslo, where being asked whether you are online or offline, as my students remind me, you must be from the 90s. And they look at you like, oh, you must be one of the guys that turn on and off the modem, aren't you? What is like? That's the world in which we live today. They never heard, my master students, the whale singing. And that's the name for that particular noise made by the modem when it was connecting. That whale singing thing, it's for people who went online in the past. This has changed some of our sort of perspectives. And I am terribly aware of the fact that we're running out of time. So let me just skip some of this. I'll come back to the fourth revolution if we have time, because I want to go quickly through these 5 challenges that I want to highlight. They're quite clear because I prepare all the sort of spring for this in the next 3 minutes. First of all, we need to make sure that these stupid machines are environmentally friendly. There's a risk. This is how they impact, because they consume electricity, and that is the positive outcome, how much they help us to save the environment. It's a trade-off. It's like curing someone who has cancer. You hope that the cure will kill the cancer before the patient, but that's the trade-off. We need to make them human-friendly, and at the moment we're not quite sure that we're doing that. Most of us will be living in enormous cities by 2050. Again, this is non-controversial sort of statistics. About 70% of humanity will be in enormous, gigantic structures. Smart, no smart, build, remember the envelope, build for IT to be successful or human-friendly. At the moment, if I have to be sincere, IT-friendly. We're building these smart sort of cities to make sure that cars, driverless, will be able to move around there, not to make sure that children are not run over. 3, and I'm doing good time, is that we're getting to 5. We need to make sure that this artificial stability work for human intelligence, not the other way around. At the moment, these stupid syntactic engines need semantic engine like us to work. That's bizarre. We thought we were putting these things at our own service. All of a sudden, we find that we are at their service. Not so good. Next time you are in the office and someone tells you, sorry, professor, we can't do this because the computer, and who is the intelligent, flexible, and the stupid, stubborn agent here, and who is going to adopt and adapt to whom? You, intelligent, a bit lazy, or the stubborn, hard-working computer? Of course, us. But we need to be careful about that. This is just statistics about how the job market in the United States will be affected, allegedly, by the introduction of AI. It's a study, very famous, again, Oxford, unfortunately, and the real thing, done in Finland. This is very famous. That is unknown. The difference between the two is that the Finnish colleagues, because they're smart, they took into account legislation. As in, for example, we will not allow driverless cars to be used as taxi in Europe. End of the story. Plenty of jobs for taxi drivers. 4, and we get into the end, we need to make sure that these machines, which are incredibly able to predict our choices, because after all, if we are rational, we're going to do it again. If you rationally choose that particular toothpaste, I hope you're going to choose that toothpaste again. So unless you're a completely crazy random agent, a computer will be able to predict your next choice, inevitably. So make sure that that is not abused, because it's going to happen. This is, again, data, we can discuss this, but it's old story. It's been available since at least 2008, again, back in California, where the successful predictive sort of policing based on software that was initially developed for earthquake. So input, prediction, output. It doesn't matter what the application is, earthquake on one side or crimes on the other, is enormously successful. Is it exactly what we want, where in fact earthquakes, you can't change them. Social conditions, well, that's the whole point of policy, isn't it? And finally, I think we should force AI to make us more human, not less. And that's the conclusion I want to share with you. One way of looking at us is as nature's beautiful glitch. And this amazing world in which, say, objects compute Newtonian functions, we're really a bit of an odd entity. We are the outlier. We shouldn't be here. Whether we shouldn't be here because we believe that God has created us, or because nature made a mistake, either way is extraordinary. Now, it's extraordinary as having unicorns around. So we are this beautiful glitch of nature, and for those of you who dabble in Java, another way of putting it is that we are the non-fatal exception in the system. Now, Java doesn't allow that, of course. The exception is always fatal, as in freezing the whole thing. As this special, glitch, this special sort of moment of anomaly that nature has been able to sustain, in fact, even nourish, you can look at, no, we're not, back to John's very careful distinction, it's not that we are, but you can look at us as information organisms, things that flourish, are depressed, are happy, They go forward, they go backwards, according to the information they receive from the environment, from education all the way to, will you marry me? And what is the answer? So as those objects, and I'm now in the last slides, our lives are really based on this informational processing that we get in a social way. But we're very fragile, including for our own identities. So we need to be very careful about how we're building all this. Not because it's intelligent, but precisely because it isn't. And it's going to affect us very deeply. We used to have good politicians in my country. No longer the case, of course. But when we did, intelligent people who did something for Europe, as opposed to getting out when the game is a bit tougher, they had also an intelligence in terms of policy. This is beautiful. We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. Freedom in shaping, but then the consequences stay with you. Freedom in choosing the train, but once you are on that train, you need to wait for the next stop. So no determinism here whatsoever, but a lot at stake. And that's the conclusion. We started with Homer. I thought we had to start classically with some Shakespeare. Men at some time are masters of their fates. Their fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars or computers, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. It's entirely up to us. So if you screw up, it will be on us for the rest of the history of humanity. Thank you.
John? Well, thank you very much to both of you, two really compelling presentations. I want to ask just one question before inviting you to ask questions. And I want to intrude what you might call the capitalist dimension into all this, because accepting what both are saying about the extent to which the intelligence in these programs are provided by us, then we have to consider some of the motivation which shapes how the systems are used. And one of the things which strikes me, and which has emerged from our discussion yesterday, is that the dynamics of capitalism leads to these systems being used in suboptimal ways. And yet they are still used in that way because it pays off in terms of the bottom line. So the classic example I would cite are certain kinds of call centers where the responses of the agent in the call center, with sort of customer service, is prompted by robots who embody a form of artificial intelligence. But although it may be said that the relationship between the robot and the agent works insofar that they do come up with some kind of answer, the answer is dysfunctional because the system isn't comprehending the full human complexity of the interaction between the customer and the agent. And yet this goes on because there's a payoff in terms of the business. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah.
I could say a comment on one side. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just as a quick reminder, I hope you don't know about this, which is one of the growing industry in terms of AI is for the digital remains. By 2050, there will be more dead people on Facebook than people alive. Guess what? No, we are biological entities. You go online, you die, you stay online. That page is transformed into some kind of a sanctuary automatically already now. This is not science fiction. And there's a whole growing industry that seeks to make sure, including following the logic that Simon has just highlighted, that the people who have lost someone, especially children, young children, they never come to closure, because you want them to come back to that page, talk to that page. And what's the best way of talking to that page if not by implementing some AI that talks back to you. No science fiction, just Google it, is a business as we speak. So that is the world in which we're living, where the logic of capitalism, unfortunately, nothing wrong with the logic itself, is how we use it, tends to take advantage of any technology to squeeze as much as you can from the people who are going to use it. So if the people who have lost a child are going to be able to come back to that page again and again and again, 10 years later, because advertisement and so on, well, there's a bit of AI there that replies, that sends emails around, that keeps, in a way, the interaction alive. That's the world in which we live.
Well, let me ask John a question.
Yeah.
Because one of the things you say, apropos of Kurzweil,
Yeah.
and I remember the encounter you had with him in the review, Kurzweil agreed with your position about the non-intelligence of AI system, but he said, but we're not far away from the point in time when we will create a real brain.
Yeah.
Now, what you said that's bullshit.
Yeah.
But why?
Technical term, yeah.
Could you explain
Okay, let me
why we're
state
thousands of
exactly
years
what it
away?
is. What he is talking about is the application of digital computer technology. And you cannot create a brain with that, because what you create is a syntactical engine. You create a set of syntactical processes. Now, one of the things that gets left out in all discussion of AI is how the human brain actually works. And the important thing to remember is it's a biological organ like any other. It's composed of cells. The cells are rather interesting because they're neurons, except for the glial cells, but the distinctive feature of the brain is a neuron. And the large numbers of neurons, by the billions, seem to be capable of creating consciousness. Now, that is what we're really talking about when we talk about human intelligence, decision-making, all these things. And when I said that we need to make a distinction between the observer-relative and the observer-independent, observer-relative reality is created by human consciousness. We create money, property, government, marriages, political elections, all of that stuff, summer vacations, universities, and cocktail parties. They're all created by human consciousness. But the human consciousness that creates them is not itself observer-relative. It's a real intrinsic feature of reality. Now, here is a scandal. We don't know how the brain does it. And consequently, we don't know how to do it artificially. I mean, if we knew how to do it artificially, it would be enormous importance for medicine. If we could cure defects in our brain by surgical implants or something like that, then that would really be an advance. Now, one of the intellectual demerits of all this attention on AI is it distracts attention from what I think is the much more interesting question. How does the brain work? How does the brain work as an actual biological mechanism? And the mistake is to suppose that by designing these hardwares that can implement programs with incredible speed, I mean, in the case of Deep Blue, it can appraise 250 million chess positions in 1 second. So it's stunning what you can do with these things, but they don't get to consciousness, and that's the crucial thing. So the question is, could there be artificial intelligence? Well, it depends on the definition of artificial intelligence. If you mean machinery that can duplicate certain features of human cognition, well, we've got that now. But if you mean a machine that is conscious in the way humans are conscious, we're nowhere near that. And as far as I know, no one's even trying to do that. They don't know how to try to do it. Every so often, I go down and lecture at Google. It's a lot of fun. Because, I mean, I love it, actually, because you have a very large number of intelligent people deeply wedded to a false project. And there's nothing more fun than expose the falsehood of the project, and they take it in good spirit because they're making lots of money, and that's, they're perfectly happy with that. But they don't, nobody's interested in what I think is the crucial question. If we're talking about artificial intelligence, we ought to be talking about how the brain creates consciousness and how we might do that in some other type of machinery. We haven't the faintest idea how to do it because we don't know how the brain does it.
Do you have anything to say about that?
Just a quick comment to say that, as you probably know, in October, the White House Office for Science and Technology Policy, the European Commission in Brussels, and the Science and Technology Committee of the House of Commons, they all came up with their own reports about AI and its impact. The sort of depressing thing is that there's largely no real policy in those reports, and there's a lot of private sector reliance on self-regulation. There will be good guys. Yeah. Now, that is not a strategy. It's keeping your fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, I just point out, this is one of the seminal articles that John wrote 35 years ago.
Yeah, God.
What's so interesting about it is that the discussants, there are 10, 15 from the heart of the AI community, and the fanaticism, both the fanaticism of their response to you and the fact they don't actually get what you're saying. That's what struck me.
Well, the amount of passion, you might think this is an arcane question. What is the significance of computational simulations of human cognition?
Yeah.
You might not think that's a deeply religious, passionate issue, but it turned out that I had stepped on a hornet's nest when I published this refutation. I thought it was kind of an obvious point I was making, and I was absolutely amazed that it produced, well, somebody did a bibliographical study, and they found 200 published refutations of the Chinese room argument in English alone. That doesn't tell you how many are in Norwegian and other languages. So, I mean, I'm not in Einstein's class. Within a couple of years of the relativity theory, there were 1,000 published refutations. So he was ahead of me. But I'm in very good company. If there are that many refutations, you must have something going for you.
All right, so who would like to ask a question? Gentleman there.
I'd like to pick up on your distinctions, syntax, semantics.
Yeah.
Right? So if we take our neurobiology, our brain, body, to be the syntax, right? It generates the semantics.
Yeah.
Our thoughts, our feelings, our pains, our anxiety, our falling in love, and so on, right? But the brain is, as you said, you know, it's cells and it's axons, blah, blah, right? And so either one takes the view that the syntax generates the semantics, which is different, right? Which is what you've said. Or they're the same thing. And semantics collapses into syntax. Okay. Now I take it one step further, because this is the interesting part. I don't know if it's 5 or 50 or 200 years from now, right?
Yeah.
A team of surgeons and engineers and guys that know protoplasm and guys that know other things, they create an artifice, right? Which is in some way like us, a mixture of protoplasm and other stuff. The syntax results in a semantics, right? A consciousness of some kind. That semantics may or may not be like ours. Let's say it's similar enough, right? Now, the interesting question, which neither of you have addressed, and that's why I'm setting this up, I mean, if they're similar enough and they look enough alike, you know? I mean, she's enticing, et cetera, I might fall in love with her, whatever this artifice, right? Do they get civil rights? Do we put them in jail if they do wrong? What happens with the morality of this?
Okay.
How do we start dealing with that?
Well, let me answer one question at a time.
Okay, right. I leave it there.
Okay. The point is, I disagree with the absolutely fundamental first premise, namely that the syntax causes the semantics. The syntax doesn't cause anything. Let me tell you some stories about where we actually know a bit about how it works. There are chemical substances that people put in their brains because it makes them feel better. I have never done this, but I discourage my students from doing it, and some of them we know how it works. In the case of cocaine, cocaine gives you the particular feelings that people tell me they get from cocaine because it impedes the capacity of the synaptic receptors to reabsorb 3 specific neurotransmitters. Norepinephrine is one, but there are 2 others, so let's just concentrate on norepinephrine. Now, what's interesting about this is this has nothing to do with syntax. This is like describing a car engine. There's an actual causal mechanism at work, and that is the the cocaine gets in to the synaptic cleft, and it actually physically impedes the processes by which the synaptic cleft normally reabsorbs neurotransmitters after a neuron firing. There's no syntax to that at all. That's an actual causal mechanism. Now, that's how the brain works. Syntax has no causal powers because it's a purely abstract notion. What happens is we embed the syntax into systems, and then the causal powers will be in the realization of the syntax in the system. But the syntax does not cause the semantics at any point. Now, what I did was give you a case where you actually have a content, the actual feeling that you get when you take cocaine. Again, I recommend against it, but this is how it works. And it works by very specific biological causal mechanisms. Roughly speaking, consciousness is to the brain as digestion is to the stomach. And nobody thinks, well, the way to understand digestion is to see it as symbol processing. That seems to me crazy. I mean, digestion is a set of biological mechanisms going on, and the same with consciousness. Consciousness is a set of biological mechanisms, and they give us these remarkable feelings that we have, these remarkable experiences we have. But the causal mechanism is not zeros and ones. The zeros and ones as such have no causal powers. The actual causal mechanism is specific biochemistry.
Luciano, you want
Can I give you just a full... We completely agree. So just to clarify one point, syntax is semantics as in zero. Okay, you get a syntax and it has no semantic whatsoever. Remember, zero. Then you have that kind of reasoning. Multiply zeros by 1,000 years, or making 1,000,000, making the whole life of the universe. What do you get? Zero. So it doesn't matter now whether the what if. We have an enormous amount of zeros, so many zeros, so many nothingness, that nothing comes out of it. Nothing. So 0 plus 0 is 0. So semantic plus semantics is semantics. Syntax plus syntax, you get syntax.
I'm amazed at how much we agree. It makes me nervous.
Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we shouldn't.
Okay, but let me just add something about this. One of the standard arguments to the Chinese room was, well, maybe that works for the present state of computation, but we're getting much more powerful computers. They're much faster. Whereas that misses the point altogether. The argument is about the definition of a Turing machine as a machine that manipulates symbols, and it's enormously powerful. It turns out any computable function is Turing computable. Anything you can compute as an algorithm, you can compute on a Turing machine, so it's very powerful. But the argument that I gave is a logical distinction between the syntax of the computer program and the semantics of human cognition, and that has nothing to do with any state of technology.
Hi, that was immensely interesting. Thank you very much. I'm glad that you. I'm glad that you toward
the first part.
Sorry. Okay, just the first part. Just the second part. I'm glad that that AI of 1980 was fixated on non-networked computers. And so there are all these descriptions of the Commodore and what it might do, or you refer to Microsoft Word. But is it possible that all of this thinking was swamped with the introduction of the internet? I mean, neither of you used the word internet. We're still talking about computation. We're still talking about computers that stay in one place. The Turing test is only applicable to something, as you say, in a room, a Chinese room, or in a box. Networked computing is mostly what the rest of us talk about, and I know it came up a little bit at the end, but isn't the consciousness to computers supplied by the now 4 billion people using them?
Well, of course, the consciousness is supplied by people, but I was afraid what you're going to say is maybe the whole internet is conscious, and that's not a serious hypothesis, because there's nothing in the internet construed as a whole lot of interconnected systems of digital computers that will get you over the hump from the syntax to the semantics. See, consciousness is produced by very specific biological mechanisms. We don't understand those mechanisms, but we're not totally ignorant. We know that the mechanisms in the brain do it, and the mechanisms in the thumbnail don't do it. It sells all in both cases.
But when our oils, and the brain is also a lot of fat, meet the devices, as much as they fear our oils and our biology and are oleophobic, there is 4 billion of us. That's like whips. That is a lot of hair cells and blood cells and brain cells and biochemistry mixed in with the silicon that, to me, meets your definition of consciousness.
Well, it doesn't, because the definition of consciousness is that there's something that it feels like to be in a conscious state. Think of the difference between drinking beer and working on your income tax. There's a qualitative character to every conscious state. Now, 4 million people busy typing into their computers, computing with each other on Facebook, let's suppose. I mean, not that many on Facebook, but presumably there will be eventually. If you get all these millions or billions of people communicating with each other, you still don't get anything remotely like the causal powers of the human brain to produce consciousness, any more than a bunch of people will digest pizza. I mean, these are specific biological mechanisms by which consciousness and digestion work as biological phenomena, and that's what gets neglected.
I do think if you put into Quora the parking place question, or even into Yahoo Answers, you'd get a better answer, than the one that this AI machine gave. The one about, can the car fit into the parking place, which is too small. Even Yahoo Answers, where the questions are mostly, how is baby formed? That's really one of them. They generate better answers, but that's, it's people.
Yeah.
But they get upvoted, and they get, in some cases, tens of thousands of answers.
I think you're right, but it's a different topic. Say crowdsourcing, which happens now in science regularly, of course, performs much better. But remember what I just said, where syntactic engines, namely our computers, use semantic engines like us, for example, to put millions of tags on photographs. Next thing you know, computers can recognize photographs. Oh, well, there are also millions of tags. Now, the reason why Go could actually be developed is because they did have a database of thousands and thousands and thousands of successful strategies they can grasp something from. Inevitably, this mix between the syntactic engines and the semantic is happening under our eyes. The question that I was trying to answer is who is gearing whom for what? Are we being sort of used? Now, when Twitter, for example, needs to disambiguate things like previous elections, Big Bird, they had to use graduate students to do that. Because, of course, the debate in American politics meant government. Whereas Twitter understood Sesame Street. So, of course, it wasn't Big Bird, the yellow thing in Sesame Street. It was the government. Disambiguate that, you need to understand the context. How you do that? You hire graduate students. Well, that is the kind of consciousness we don't want to have, quote-unquote consciousness, where basically we, like in the Matrix, are being used as some modules by syntactic engines to perform. Well, that's not nice.
All right, we'll have one more question. Lady there? Yeah.
Thanks so much for this indeed. I would like to ask a question where Floridi let us off, So one question is if there is actually artificial intelligence or not. Another one is how mathematic rationalities are actually already influencing our everyday lives. So you some examples towards the end there. And since you're both smart people, I would like to ask you, shouldn't we be asking rather how both of us, humans and computers, play a role in the process of creating reasoning? Because we can see that quite some of this computational reasoning is taking over and taking decisions away from us, taking a lot of political arenas. So the question is for us then now, where and how do we actually see arenas for us interacting with computers in a way that we actually do understand their rationalities and can influence them?
Yeah, so that is the hope. That we might actually be able to have smart people and dumb technologies work together for something a bit bigger than either. We already know, for example, that in medicine, diagnosis today is done by computers. And if you're not seeing a doctor who relies on, say, something like IBM Watson, well, you're in trouble. You better change doctor because nothing like a computer can scan those particular tests. So we know that all this is happening. It doesn't mean, again, I can't stress this enough. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's any intelligence there, but there's extraordinary abilities to do things differently from us. It will require intelligence on our side. It doesn't on the computer side. We're just realizing that a lot of the things we do requires zero intelligence. I mean, driving a car can be done by a totally stupid entity, if it is a computer. In my case, it requires some intelligence. So the hope is that, but I just mentioned the reports, it's a hope that I don't see with too much sort of optimism, is that we are converging towards a world where sort of these dumb machines and smart people can cooperate in a successful way. Is it going to happen? Well, that is the hope. It is happening as we speak. I don't think so. Not now. We're actually doing the opposite to a large extent. We're adapting to the machines. And that is the sort of warning that I think we should have in mind.
John, do you want to say something?
Well, let me say a little bit about that. We've had this entire discussion without anybody explaining what they mean by artificial intelligence. Now, one of the inventors of this, the actual term was due to John McCarthy, but one of the early champs was Herb Simon. And he said that the definition of AI was if you could get a machine to do something, which if a human did it, you would say was intelligent behavior, then that's artificial intelligence. I don't think that's very helpful because, for example, if I take a dry stream bed and turn a hose on it, the water will find a line of least resistance, whereas if I have to find a line of least resistance while I'm running down the stream bed, it takes some intelligence on my part. But that would turn the water into an artificial intelligence machine. So I think that's probably not a helpful definition. I don't think it's a useful philosophical question to worry, is artificial intelligence possible? I think the interesting question is, what are the limits on computation as defined by Alan Turing? And there I think you can give a precise answer to that, because the power of the Turing machine comes from the fact that it's a syntactical engine, and there's no way to get from the syntax to the semantics without adding some other element to the system. And that's what I've been trying to do. But I think worried about, is artificial intelligence possible? That's going to depend on your definition of artificial intelligence.
Well, I think we're going to have to call an end there. So I want to thank our two speakers and the audience for, I think, an exceptionally interesting, stimulating session. Thanks so much.
Thank you.